Okay. I want to sit down, and so we're ready to kick this off. Good evening, and thank you for being here. I'm Joe Rasco, the mayor, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to another night to engage with the Army Corps. We're so glad that you're here. Tonight is going to be a little bit different than yesterday, but we appreciate those that are here for the second night. But hopefully what we're doing is learning about our island and learning what we have to do to keep it the way that it is. So this is the mission that we have with the Army Corps, to work together, and this is going to take a little bit of time, but it's a great project. I like to say kudos to Gary Gross, who back in 2019, as a former council member in 2019, he pushed the rest of his group to get on board and get us into the Army Corps' orbit so that we could work together. And with that, I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Williamson, our village manager, so that he can tell you what we're going to do tonight and what all this means for us as a village.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So welcome tonight. So before we start, I do want to recognize you have Councilmember Moss over here to your right, so thank you for coming, Councilmember. I see a number of familiar faces from last night, but I also see a lot of new folks. So thank you for coming again, if you're here for a second night, and thank you for coming for tonight. As the mayor mentioned, we're going to do things a little bit differently tonight. We're going to go ahead and do the introduction as we did last night, because we want to make sure that you guys understand what a coastal storm risk management study is, understand who the Corps of Engineers is, who's coming into the village to help us solve these problems. We want to make sure you have that relationship with them before we start digging deeper into the program. So for those who were here last night, bear with us for the first couple slides. You're going to see the same ones again, but I think it'll be good for the other folks who are here. Then we're going to go in a little bit different direction. We did some work today. We did about 13, 14 hours. Will we take that? 8 hours, okay. They told me they did 14 hours. I thought they were there at 5 o'clock in the morning, Pat. I don't know, but they did a lot of work today. But this is a long process, as you'll see. This is a step-by-step, very deliberate process. And today, you're now in Corps of Engineers world, so you got to go through acronyms. We did what's called a POOCS analysis. All right, so follow with me on this one. Problems, opportunities, objectives, and constraints. So they're going to kind of walk you through what we came up with today and then ask you for feedback. They're going to ask you for what are some of the problems you see? What are the problems that you know? We're going to walk through each one of those 4 things. Please give us some feedback, because we want to make sure we understand. You know, we're obviously doing it they're doing it at the Corps of Engineers level. Big picture, right? Big picture. So what do they need to consider? We're looking at that from the village administration level. I want to hear what you all see out there, what the community sees. So please be involved. That's why we want you here tonight. So with that, I'm going to introduce you and bring up here Chris McNeese. He's the project manager from the Corps of Engineers. He's going to walk you through the start, and then he'll introduce the rest of his team as we go through. So, thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Steve. Good evening, folks. My name is Chris McNeese. I am the the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers project manager out of the Jacksonville district, and I like to say that I am your project manager. So I want to introduce myself. Also, I would like to introduce Miss Amy Thompson. She's our planning technical lead. She and I will be dual hatting up here along with Steve as part of the information that we share with you tonight and the information that we hope to get back from you tonight. So this is definitely interactive. We just don't want to talk to you, but we want to hear from you. So for those of you that were here last night, thank you for being here again tonight. We hope to get your input. We hope to get your feedback. So real quick, so as Steve alluded to, we have our very first abbreviation up on the screen, CSRM. It is Coastal Storm Risk Management. So you'll see that throughout the slides. So thank you, Steve, for starting us off. Go ahead with the next slide. So what I would like to do is, first of all, just kind of introduce you to who is, didn't change. Okay. So first of all, who is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers? So now we have technical difficulties. All right. Never. Okay. All right. So in the next slide, that when it eventually does pop up, we have basically various pictures of who is our leadership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So while tonight you have various folks from our Jacksonville district, which is in Jacksonville, Florida, as well as our South Atlantic Division, which is in Atlanta, Georgia, we start all the way up in Washington, D.C. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is a Department of Defense organization, if you're not aware. So we fall under the Secretary of the Army, and Honorable Michael Connor is our Assistant Secretary to the Army of Civil Works. So he's probably the most senior civilian appointed by the President, and he is the ASA-CW, as we refer to him. Again, because we are a Army organization, we have various folks that we refer to as the green suiters. So our Chief of Engineers is Lieutenant General Spellman. And Major General Graham is our Deputy Chief of Engineers. These gentlemen both sit up in D.C., and they report to the ASA-CW Connors. And that's at our headquarter level. Well, now you can see the Army Corps seal. There we go. We have people. All right, so as I said earlier, we have our ASA-CW Connor there on the left. He's appointed by the President. We have Lieutenant General Spellman, who is our Chief of Engineers, as well as Major General Graham, who is our Deputy. We have our Director of Civil Works, Mr. Belk. And then as we dip from the headquarters level in D.C. down to our division level of the South Atlantic Division, Brigadier General Hibner is our division commander. Our senior civilian is Dr. Larry McAllister. And just so you're aware, the Army Corps of Engineers is broken into 9 different divisions. We are worldwide, so we have 9 divisions scattered across the world. And we are located, as I said earlier, in the South Atlantic Division. And so the South Atlantic Division consists of the Wilmington District in North Carolina, Charleston District in South Carolina, the Savannah District in Savannah, the Mobile District in Mobile, Alabama, and then, of course, we have the Jacksonville District here in Jacksonville. Now, the footprint for the Jacksonville District, our area of responsibility is everything from about southeast Georgia over to Lake City, Florida, and all the way south into Monroe, Key West, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. So that is the Jacksonville District's area of responsibility. So obviously with Key Biscayne having its study, you fell within the Jacksonville District. So, and then specifically within the Jacksonville District, Colonel James Booth is our district commander, and our senior civilian is Mr. Howard Gonzalez. Both of these gentlemen were here along with Congresswoman Salazar yesterday as part of our kickoff to our workshop that we started yesterday. So, next slide. More close to home, if you are part of the project delivery team, please stand up. Last night I went through and introduced everybody, but I just wanted to let you folks know that this is the team at an individual level that will be working with you. So we have in this room, we have economists, we have engineers, we have coastal engineers, we have modelers, we have geologists, we have biologists, we have environmental leads, we have archaeologists, cultural resources folks. All of these folks here, guys can be seated, thank you. All of these folks here will be working on your behalf. That's about the best way I can summarize it, is that all of these folks here will be working on your behalf to evaluate alternatives that we can put forth as solutions to the various problems that we identify here in the village of Key Biscayne that inevitably leads to, say, flooding and damages associated with flooding. Next slide. Alrighty, I'll keep going. So the next slide is going to be a picture of Key Biscayne and the history. So just to kind of give everybody a heads up, Key Biscayne, as it was alluded to tonight, kind of began its quest for a feasibility study in, I guess it was the 2018-2019 timeframe. And about that same time, the Miami-Dade County's Coastal Storm Risk Management Program was undergoing a renewal. So the way in which most programs, most municipal programs work in the CSRM is that the Corps of Engineers will partner with a municipality or a government, and in this case, Miami-Dade County is our sponsor. Now, Miami-Dade County has multiple authorized segments with the federal government. So they have the Sunny Isles segment, which is located north of Bal Harbor, and then they have the main segment, which consists of the beaches that make up Bal Harbor, Surfside, and the city of Miami Beach. So there's roughly 3 additional segments, but then 1 authorized segment. What we're working on for you, and working with the county and working with the village, is we're hopefully planning to add the Key Biscayne segment as the 3rd federally authorized segment to the Miami-Dade County's Coastal Storm Risk Management Program. So that's inevitably our goal here as we work with you over the next few years, is to get that project or this project here in your backyard authorized. So initially, from the time frame of roughly 2018 to 2022, we were working on the main segment's renewal. So when an authorized project becomes federally authorized, it's a 50-year partnership between that sponsor and the federal government. And we partnered to do beach renourishment type projects so that we keep whatever type of solution that we had prepared as part of the authorized project, we keep that in place. We work with you so that we can keep that protection. So the very first, I guess, Miami-Dade County Coastal Storm Program was authorized or initially was constructed in 1975. It was originally authorized in '68. But the first construction of the Bal Harbor segment was in 1975, and that's when the 50-year clock started. So the first 50 years of the main segment was set to expire in 2025, and the Corps began to work with Miami-Dade County so as to renew that 50 years. And that's what we did. So between 2018 and 2022, we worked on another feasibility study, and we renewed that main segment, which was reauthorized in the Water Resources Development Act of 2022. Now, I tell you all of that because during that main segment study, we tried to incorporate the Key Biscayne segment into the main segment. And what we discovered as part of the evaluation for Key Biscayne is that while we recognized benefits that would protect the Key Biscayne area, what happened is those benefits that we recognized from the ocean side, those benefits were lost because of flooding due to the Back Bay side. And so what the Corps realized is that we needed to basically have the Key Biscayne segment be its own study. The complexity of not only the ocean side, but the complexity of the Back Bay side created the need for its own individual study. And that's where we are now. So we actually removed the Key Biscayne study from the main segment, and we received appropriations from Congress in FY23, specifically the FY23 work plan, which was, I guess we all got the news in April of 2023. And from that time frame, we've been working with the county and we've been working with the village to execute what's called a feasibility cost share agreement, which was executed about 6 months later in October. And from there, we've been working to more or less kick off the study in December and then basically kick off our workshop and our public meetings with you all here in January. So next slide. So just to kind of explain real quick, we are in the feasibility phase. So right now you see we are in the feasibility study in the Chief's Report where the yellow star is. Where we started back in the problem identification, well, that happened back in 2019, as alluded to tonight. That's when Key Biscayne raised their hand and either spoke with the county or they came to the Corps and they said, hey, we have a problem. We have a problem here in our own community and we'd like your support. The study authorization, we actually had a study authorization, I hate to say on the shelf, But there was a study authorization that was applicable to Key Biscayne under Public Law 8471. It's actually a law from 1955. But Congress indicated that any tidal or coastal flooding problems or communities that suffer along the eastern and southern coasts of the United States qualified for a study. So we are actually already have a study authority. We didn't have to request from Congress a study authority. We had one. So now we're moving into the study funding. Well, that's another thing. As I said earlier, we had funding lined up, but because this project, because the Corps felt as though this project needed its own independent study, we received our first initial appropriations in FY23, and now here we are right now kicking off the feasibility study with you. As I said last night, the feasibility study process will take the norm of a project or the norm of a feasibility study is typically 3 years. Within 3 years, a lot of times we will complete a feasibility study. We actually, but what I said last night is this particular study, because of its complexity, we're looking at 2 different forces. We're looking at 2 different factors, not just the ocean side from storm surge, but we're also looking at the flooding and the inundation that's caused from the Back Bay side. So it's not likely that we'll complete this study on the average of 3 years. We probably estimate sometime between the 3 to 5 year time frame, but that's still to be determined. We need to hear from you what solutions and what problems you have so that we can evaluate alternatives and solutions that we need to study. We need to be sure that whatever we come up with, that it's engineeringly feasible, it needs to be environmentally acceptable, and it has to be economically justified. So those are the 3 E's that we like to talk about during a feasibility study. So once the feasibility study is actually completed, we prepare what's called a chief's report. So that chief's report is in reference to the Chief of Engineers, Lieutenant General Spellman. The chief's report is completed and it's submitted to Congress with a recommended plan that we all come up with that's agreed upon. And it goes before Congress and it's authorized. That's when the project becomes an authorized project. Now, it doesn't happen overnight. It does not happen overnight that we start to build the new project. The first thing we have to have is that project has to be authorized. So just like the main segment and just like the Sunny Isles segment, the Key Biscayne segment would have to be authorized by Congress. Once it is authorized by Congress, then we wait for an appropriation to do what's called pre-construction engineering and design, the PED phase. So just for awareness, we're currently in the feasibility phase. The next phase after authorization of our project, as well as the first dollars of appropriation, will be where we begin to design. We begin to engineer those things, those solutions that we had come up with during the feasibility. Now, after the PED phase is complete, then we await construction appropriation. The construction appropriation is where we then wait to receive those dollars, and then once we receive those dollars from Congress, then we actually construct what we design, and then we'd be in the final phase of the construction phase. As you can see from these timelines, nothing that I'm telling you tonight is overnight. There is anywhere between a 10 to 15 year time frame in an ideal situation. And so we want to be sure that we're upfront with you and transparent, that while we'd love to have something actually constructed in the next 5 years, it's not likely. But we want to be sure that everybody's kind of tracking that same timeline. With that being said, I'll pause, and Miss Amy, if you'll take through.
Yeah, so I'm the next slide, but before I move on, I don't know that you defined the acronym WRDA, and our authorizations come in the Water Resources Development Act, and so those happen normally, hopefully, every 2 years from Congress, as long as everything goes according to plan. So that's what the WRDA acronym is there. So that's where we get our study authorizations if we don't already have an existing, and that's also where we get our chief's reports authorized in order to get a study authorized and approved. Okay, so this is our planning process. And if you were here last night, it was a little bit, I had a little bit more on here. It's a little bit too complicated, I think. But the main piece of this that I want to convey is that it's a long process. Chris mentioned that it's typically 3 years. That's a good goal that we try to meet, but a lot of our studies are really complicated, and they extend past 3 years. And like you mentioned, for this study, we have water coming from 2 directions. So it's going to be a little bit more complicated than that. And so if you see the blue rectangle here, we're right there at the beginning at scoping, and that's just where we collect information. We want to hear from you, and we want to know what problems you're seeing on the village. What are you encountering? You know, what are your questions? What are your concerns? And so that's really why we're here. Once we get a little bit further, we get into, well, what are some conceptual ideas? And we're kind of right in that in-between period where we're coming up on our first big milestone, which is where we go to our vertical team and we present some conceptual ideas that basically it's just general concepts of, well, these could be some things that could address the problems. We haven't done any kind of detailed analysis. We haven't collected any data or modeling or anything like that. But it tells them that we've done enough research to be able to say, this is how long we think the study will take, this is how much we think it will cost, and there's some general concepts that we think could really address these problems, and we want to start our detailed analysis to look into these solutions. So that's really step 2. And an important piece of 1 and 2 here that are in blue is that's part of our public engagement period. And in just a minute on the next slide, we'll have our environmental lead talk about our environmental engagement. So I won't steal his thunder on that. But that's where we really come to the public and ask for your input. And then once we have gotten more into a really solid set of alternatives and plans and solutions, we get into the more detailed analysis where we look at modeling. We're going to probably have to do collecting some surveys, some environmental data, some engineering, geotechnical type information to do a really thorough analysis of what will work. And then, of course, then you get to your chief's report where you have authorization. And in general, 3 to 5 years is a pretty safe timeline for most studies to be able to meet their chief's report. Next slide. And now, Darren Pecora is our environmental lead, and he's going to talk about 2 slides for environmental considerations. And then I'll be back.
Hello, everyone. My name is Darren Pecora. I'm a biologist up at Jacksonville District and the environmental lead on the project. So as you saw on the last slide, there was draft feasibility report, and it said EA or EIS. And that's our NEPA document, the National Environmental Policy Act document. And the EA is environmental assessment, and the EIS is environmental impact statement. Depending on the project's proposed impacts, we would do an environmental impact statement if it was a greater impact. So part of the NEPA documentation, it's a public disclosure document. We want to disclose our impacts on the human environment. The human environment encompasses social, economic, cultural, and natural resources. So the human environment changes, depending on where we do our studies. And this is kind of a, preliminary list of some of the things we're considering for this project area. Off to the left there, you can see, the bolded resources and, things we're considering. Those might be a little bit more challenging for this project. And a lot of these also correspond with environmental laws and executive orders. And in the NEPA document, we'll disclose how we're complying with those laws or executive orders. And another point is, as we go through, these various resources, our first thing that we're going to try to do is minimize impacts to any resource. We're going to try to avoid any impacts to resources, and then we'll try to minimize. So by minimizing, if we're working in the water, we'd maybe put up turbidity curtains or something like that. Or if we're working on the beach, we'd not do work during sea turtle nesting season, and so forth. And then the last thing, if we can't do the first two, then we'd go and mitigate for impacts. But so you can see fish and wildlife resources, this area is great for fishing. A lot of people go out. There's charter fishing and recreational fishing for, a variety of species. People go for lobster and stone crabs. So, it's an important resource to consider. Over here you can see we have Biscayne Bay Aquatic Preserve. It's an estuary, a rearing ground for, the juvenile life stages of a lot of these species. And then out in the ocean-facing shoreline, like further out, they're about a mile offshore, there's coral reef, which is another resource. In both these areas, we have essential fish habitat, which you can see up there, and that's administered under the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Act, which we have to consult with National Marine Fisheries Service on, and that looks at which federally managed fisheries, are in the area, and National Marine Fisheries Service has, basically reached out, and we've coordinated with them a little bit already, and we have, snapper grouper kind of in the area, as well as, spiny lobster and a variety of other species. Let's see, so, we have wetlands kind of north and south in the state park, in the county park, with mangroves. We've designated critical habitat, which we'll look at in the next slide, threatened and endangered species, and aesthetics. So, anything we put forward has to be, aesthetically acceptable to the community. And we have a way of looking at that through visual resources analysis. And there's a lot of other things we'll consider for the project. We have tourism here, water quality. We're seeking a water quality certification through the state of Florida. Tourism, obviously, and cultural resources with our archaeologists here that will be looking at that and coordinating with the State Historic Preservation Office. Let's see. Next slide. Yeah, I'll just point out, you can see there's actually a yellow stingray that was taken, this picture was taken out in a seagrass survey back in our last study back in 2021. We had a seagrass survey off in front of the beach there, and there was also some non-endangered corals spotted out there. But here's a list of some of the, threatened and endangered species we're considering in the project area. We have Nassau grouper. So I just heard that sometimes people catch those occasionally out off the marina there. The kids go out there fishing. So they're actually, definitely in the project area. American crocodile, which I'm hearing more and more reports about around the key. It's kind of interesting. Coral, so there's 7 different species of ESA listed coral. And in the vicinity of the project, they're mostly a little bit further offshore, but we need to consider that. Sea turtles, nesting on the beaches. Queen conch was a proposed newly listed species that we need to consider in the project area. And then there's also designated critical habitats under the Endangered Species Act associated with these for coral, sea turtle, Nassau grouper, and manatee. So we'll be working with federal agencies consulting on these species, National Marine Fisheries Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, depending on the species. As we work through the NEPA documentation analysis process, when we get to the end, we'll have completed our consultations and hopefully be in full environmental compliance with the project, and it'll all be documented in the integrated feasibility study report and NEPA document. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Darren. Okay, Last night we talked a little bit about problems that we're seeing on the island, and today we spent the morning talking about our problems, opportunities, objectives, and constraints. I know Steve mentioned the POOCs. I really don't like that acronym. I really don't. So I try never to say it. You heard me say it once. So we talked about problems, and we broke up into groups all day today. They were in little groups like you're in school, and we're at tables, and we assigned them. So we spent the morning and talked about problems, opportunities, objectives, and constraints. And so added to our list, and some of the main themes that we heard, in addition to what we presented last night, which was primarily things associated with storm damage and flooding, tide, surge, inundation, erosion, rainfall, stormwater movement, but also disruption to the local economy and quality of life, damages to critical infrastructure, like fire stations, the electrical substation, police station, and also damages to evacuation route. I've heard a lot about the causeway, and actually I was excited to see when I came in downstairs that they had information about the causeway project. So we grabbed some of that information when we came in. So what we want to do, I have my recorder over here, is on each of these problems, opportunities, objectives, and constraints, hear from you all if you have problems that you want to tell us. So we spent the day hearing from other federal, state, local agencies, what they see as problems working in the area. And so we want to hear from you tonight. What do you see as the problems in the area or at your house or what you've observed? Any information you want to share. And we have someone to write it down for us. Or questions, anything. Well, I'm up here. I'm doing the front half of the room tonight.
Hi, Marty Hernandez. Relative lives at 540 West Master Drive, which is adjacent to Pines Canal. So when you mention Oceanside and Back Bay area, that includes Pines Canal in that Back Bay discussion, I assume? Okay.
Do you have anything specific about the Pines?
Dating back to all hurricanes, the surge.
Just put Pines Island Drive.
The surge coming from the south is
Okay, from the south.
significant as well. It's not just the bay.
Yeah, I think there was a graphic that showed the flood pathways, and one of them was coming a little bit from the south. Is that what? Yeah. Kind of southwest. Oh, I already have the mic.
Charles Sherman, 324 West Heather Drive. You've mentioned a couple of times that you're concerned with the bay and the ocean as the two principal threats. I'd like to suggest that you assess the water that comes up straight through the ground. We live on a barrier island. It's sand and coral, and it's pretty thin, like 11 inches, I've been told several times. So the water will be coming straight up eventually, and I'm not sure that you can create a bathtub big enough to keep us dry. Thank you.
I got you, Amy. Don't worry. Oh, you're fast.
Hi. I'm not going to present a problem right now. I just have a question for you because I'd like to know what the Army Corps could realistically give our island. When we started this, it was specific to maintain nourishment of our beaches, and it's evolved into studying the Back Bay. But what can we hope for? Because you're asking us our problems about our island, but a lot of these things, I don't know if they fall under the purview of the Army Corps. So if you could just give us a little understanding of, I guess, best goal, best case scenario for our community so that we can give you information that's relevant to that goal.
Do you want to take, or Marty? Here. Let's let her, yeah.
Yeah, so what the Army Corps, what our mission area is to reduce flooding, damages from flooding. So we have our federal interest is what we call it, to be able to contribute funds from a federal interest perspective, is that the benefits of our solution outweigh the cost of our solution, right? Or the cost to fix it. And so what that is, and so when we did the first project, what we found, and I'll just walk up here real quick. And Marty can correct me if I misstate anything. But what we found is we can put a solution here on the beach that protects the surge from coming up, but the water from the back bay actually floods the benefits that we're claiming or that we're counting for our benefits, right? So if we're saying we're saving houses from getting damaged here from the ocean side, the flooding from the back is actually flooding those same structures. So we can't count those as federal benefits. So that's why we're having to come back and actually restudy so we reduce the flooding that's going to come in from the backside. So what would that solution look like? We don't know yet. We're figuring that out. So today we've looked at all kinds of brainstorming, and we're going to come back and look and talk with you all to help us develop solutions that may be palatable for you as residents here. So we're going to do this together. We're going to do this as a group, and there's there's challenges in providing and to protect that water from coming in. But some of the things that we saw were, there's, some natural and nature-based features we can look at, putting them in the water. There's some island-type scenarios that we can look. There's some, walls are not popular. We know that. But, there are many things that we will consider and see if our benefits outweigh the cost of those. And so we're also looking at part of our evaluation, part of our day today was to look at the metrics and the criteria that we may use to develop a solution. And we're going to come back and share that with you. One of that, what we've seen here in the community from all of you and what we've heard is that, you guys, the cohesiveness of this community, we don't want to interrupt that, right? And that's very high on our list as we're developing alternatives, right? And as we're evaluating those. So those are a lot of the things we looked at today. And we're, the cost is a big driver in our evaluation, the benefits, also how we impact the environment, as Darren stated, is also what we're going to look at as part of that evaluation. So does that answer your question? So we're not quite there yet, but our goal is to reduce the flooding from the back side so we can actually get you a beach on the front side. Yeah.
Do you consider the benefit to the coast of Miami, that's in essence the city of Miami, the mainland, protected by our island, and how we are providing an economic value, like a barrier for storm surge? And do you include that in your analysis?
So we talked about that today. We're actually taking that question up to our policy team to see if we can count some of those benefits. So if the island, if we built a stronger island, right? If we had a full comprehensive solution to stop flooding on the island, would that provide not only the island benefits, but also help reduce the impacts to the mainland? And can we count some of those benefits? I don't know that answer yet, but our economists are back there. They're going to help us answer that question, and we will get back to you on that. But I don't have a definitive answer, but the team did talk about that a lot today. So we are thinking, and that, I can't make any promises of what we can and cannot include at this point, just because we're at the very beginning of the study. But that is something that the team did discuss today with our agencies.
Thanks, Marcy. Yeah.
Sorry.
So in terms of impacts, in the last 50-plus years I've lived in Miami-Dade County, you know, the beach erosion has been tremendous. And there have been different projects that have renourished the beach, and it continues. My understanding, and if you could please verify this for me, is part of the damage is because we no longer have the natural littoral flow of sand, that was interrupted by government cut. And the question is, because government cut has really worsened our erosion, and I believe they dredged maybe 5 years ago. They caused a huge amount of damage to the coral, and there were a lot of problems with that. Are they mitigating those damages, and would it be appropriate for part of their mitigation to mitigate the erosion on our beach?
Well, I was going to come back to the economist, but I'm not the economist, I mean the engineers.
I don't know.
So-
Yeah, I don't know that. Yeah, go ahead, Warren.
So we have a authority, it's section 111 of, I want to say it's like the Rivers and Harbor Act of 1970, but basically we need to, if we have a federal channel that causes downdrift erosion, we need to evaluate that. So that's something on the table we can evaluate. From what I've seen, I think government cut, you know, when it was dredged in early 1900s, 1920s to 40s-ish, you know, 1905. Okay, so I mean, from what I saw, it looked like there was kind of an initial impact, I guess, to the keys to the south of it. More recently, I think that has kind of stabilized once the, you know, kind of bypassing mechanisms have gotten in place some, but teasing out the impacts from, you know, storms versus what the navigation channel itself is causing is tricky, but it's something we can look into. And I believe we did a section 111 study like back in the 70s or 60s or 70s for like a one-time beach nourishment project on Key Biscayne that was more in the park area. There's section, yeah.
So just please look for that. I
Yeah.
believe there's additional information on that and documentation. And in fact, if you look at the renourishment that you did for Virginia Beach, it was the federal funds were tied to part of that erosion, which showed that it continued to Key Biscayne. From my understanding, Gary, that's correct.
Okay.
So
I
please.
mean, I would put, you know, navigation channel impacts as under a problem statement. Yeah.
I wrote little notes over there for my.
Okay.
Gary wanted
Okay. And then I'll go after that.
I have a question. What do we, excuse me, what do we do in the meantime? It's obviously going to be several years before we have anything that actually happens to take care of our beaches. We have had an ongoing problem renourishing our beaches at our own expense after the studies that we've paid for, simply because the first time we wanted to do this, the study came back that we needed a 30,000 cubic yard renourishment. Our beaches used to be 80 feet deep. They got to a point where they were 5 feet deep in some areas, and we were in danger of losing some of our buildings before we finally got an approval. So every time we go for an approval on a beach renourishment, which we pay for, instead of 30,000 cubic yards, we got approved for 19,000. Why? Because we were not allowed to encroach upon the seagrass. So instead of doing 30 and being 60 feet out, we did 19 and we were 40 feet out. 3 years later, we need to do another renourishment. Guess what? The seagrass didn't stay where it was. It kept coming in. So we needed a 22,000 cubic yard renourishment. We got approved for 15 or 16,000 because we couldn't encroach on the seagrass. So this has been a totally escalating and ongoing issue. And so my question is, if we have to wait 3 or 4 years before you start your project, is there anything you can do to help us at least adequately renourish our beaches in the meantime while we're waiting, so we don't have to have a Band-Aid, a very expensive Band-Aid, every 2 or 3 years, or every time there's a storm that comes through, because that's what's been happening for a long, long time. And so 80,000, 60, 40, 30, 10, 5. I mean, if this keeps happening with the limitation because of the seagrass, we'll end up with no beaches before you're even ready to start your project. Is there anything you can do about that?
They're all looking at me, Gary. So anyway, first on the seagrass, you guys know that we've talked about that very explicitly today. Because in order to get the sand we want, we have to push out into the ocean, but obviously we're going to be battling up against the seagrass, and obviously that if we impact it, we'll have to mitigate it somewhere else. That is a cost, as you can imagine, because mitigation is a cost. So that'll be part of the cost-benefit analysis. What do we do in the meantime? Well, we had Irma, and thank goodness FEMA came through, paid for a good portion of it. I think, when I recall, DEM paid for a good portion. Well, DEM paid for some. And in the end, I think 95% of it, plus or minus, was paid from external sources. Unfortunately, Ian, Nicole, and all these unnamed storms that have hit us over these last year and a half have also had a significant impact. I think it's even worse than Irma, it looks like right now, right? We've done a lot of work. We've gotten money from the state. So right now we've got a 50-50 match. We're going to be starting in 3 weeks, right, Dr. Samimi? So right now, 50-50 match. You know, obviously we'd like it to be paid for by the Corps, but the Corps doesn't pay for that until we're actually in the Coastal Storm Risk Management Study. So that's, unfortunately, whatever they showed up there, 12 or so years away. But in the meantime, we are in what's called DEP's Beach Management Funding Assistance Program that we monitor every year, and we have an ability to go back to the state to match costs.
But Steve, and I appreciate that, but my question really wasn't about who's going to pay for it. My question is, can we finally get an adequate renourishment done that goes out far enough to at least last for several years so that we don't have to keep going back and doing it and redo every time a series of storms come through? And we all know that it's not going to get any slower, it's going to get faster. Is there anything that you can do or anyone in your network can do to help us not be limited by the seagrass encroachment and do an adequate renourishment?
And I'm not even going to let them talk on that, because until we're in their study, they can't help us as much as they'd love to do it. I'm sure they would. That's our problem, working with the state right now. So,
I'll handle it. Don't worry.
But it comes down to money, and it comes down to our willingness to go toe-to-toe with the state to impact the seagrass. But again, we're going to have to pay for it, right? So in the end, it comes down to money. So yes, we've got you. Trust me, Gary. We deal with the state every time when we talk about seagrass. I got you. You can come with us to the next conversation. It's always a fun one. What do you want, Mr. London? What do you have, Mr.
You
London?
mentioned a cost-benefit relationship, and I think that's great. And since most of the beach is public, it should be pretty easy for the state, the federal government. We might even contribute a few dollars to make it work. But you're talking about a Back Bay study. Most everything on the Back Bay property is privately owned. Our government owns almost nothing in the Back Bay. Now, are you prepared, or will you be prepared to evidently either do the work or help contribute to the homeowners to raise their seawalls, to do whatever that you decide after 2 or 3 years of studying that's going to happen? And if you're not, how will you implement your Back Bay study since it's all private property?
We're going to get to a slide eventually that has some measures or solutions that you can think about. And some of those are non-structural solutions. So we can actually recommend in a plan non-structural solutions that include raising houses voluntarily, or other raising homes, a program that raises homes. Yeah, so there are no. Elevating, sorry. Yeah, not raising them flat. No, elevating. Yeah, elevating homes. So there are things like that we can do that are non-structural solutions that we can evaluate. So.
Excuse me, would you pay to elevate it, or we pay to elevate it? Would the private homeowner pay to elevate it?
The study. sorry,
mean cost
say
shared?
that. It's cost shared in the study.
Here, can I jump in?
What is,
So the actual construction piece that you're speaking of is a cost shared. So right now, we're in a 50-50, the feasibility phase is 50-50. So we brought 50% of the cost to the feasibility, and Miami-Dade County and the village brought 25-25. So that's how the split is. When we actually go into the PED phase, where we come up with the design, where we actually look at how to raise or elevate those homes, if that's one of the solutions that is authorized, then the design is a 65-35% split, where 65% brought to the table is the federal government, 35% brought to the table is the sponsor. When we go to construction, the cost share will vary, but initially it starts around 65-35 as well for construction phase. So yes, the federal government will bring dollars to the table, but the non-federal sponsor and the village will also have to bring a cost shared proportion to those construction, to the needed construction funds.
How would you determine the cost-benefit relationship of raising a $15 million house?
That's too early in the equation right now.
and it wouldn't be per house. It would be the entire.
No, I can, yeah, can we? So well, can I go? So first, for any alternative, so any alternative we consider, the basic benefit cost analysis, we look without a project. We're going to say over the next 50 years, this structure or this neighborhood or every residents in the village, we're going to try to project a monetary value of how much damage is going to occur over the next 50 years, and then any alternative that we come up with is going to prevent a certain amount of those damages that happen without the alternative. So those are our benefits. All of those alternatives are going to have a cost associated with it. And so that those benefits divided by that cost is your benefit to cost ratio. But those costs for any alternative, no matter what it is, if we need to do something on private lands, we're going to need to get some form of proper easements to do work on that land, and our policy is that the non-federal sponsor, who's Dade County, is going to be responsible for getting those easements from private property owners that are needed to implement the alternative we come up with. And getting those easements can have a cost associated with it. That's part of that project cost. And that part of it gets tricky, and it's going to vary depending on what the type of alternative is, but it needs to be accounted for and considered as we move forward.
I mean, and I can address a little bit more on how we look at damages. So the damages to a structure are based on a function of how deep the water would get, the probability that it's going to occur on a given year, and the frequency, how often it occurs over a period. So we look at both the structure value, and concrete block homes are different than a stick home, right? Because you have different damages that would occur. We look at a percentage of the structure value in content. So if you have, content value is typically a large part. We look at vehicle damages during an inundation event. We talked earlier about the elevation, elevating homes down here. As Chris talked earlier, there's an engineering feasibility. Can you actually raise a concrete block or a poured concrete or a reinforced concrete structure without causing structural integrity problems? Maybe, but how expensive is it going to be, right? That's something we would look at as we go through it. Is it more expensive to do that than actually the damages that are occurring? So that's part of what the economic analysis is going to look at. And we're going to go through a series of solutions, and we'll look at, maybe 90% of the damages are in one little area, and that's all we have to focus on, and the rest, you're going to have to leave some residual risk because the cost of trying to provide 100% protection would just far outweigh the benefits that you're going to get from it. So that's the role of the economists as we look through it. And I could definitely, if you guys need, we have 3 economists here right now because that's a big part of the federal decision on whether we move forward with a project. And we'd be happy to talk to anybody about, a little bit more in depth of how we do our analysis.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Marty.
Just an observation. I think probably about 70% of the structures on the Back Bay are elevated. So that hopefully is something that is considered and see the elevation of the homes?
It 100%
Because,
would be.
and the other thing, I just wanted a little impart a little institutional knowledge. When we started with this process with Gary, I believe there was a discussion about the last large renourishment that was done. I think it was by the Army Corps. Was it 1987? And that they had determined that the beach was extended far, and it's because they had done some calculations that that's where it should be. So hopefully, just if you could consider extending the beach to the levels it was done in 1987, that would be great. So just keep that in mind. And I know that there was a lot of, thought and calculations put into it. So it's not arbitrary, but it was optimal. So please consider that. And last, in terms of benefits to the community, and I know Katie raised the function of Barrier Island and protection for what is now a vibrant city and is incredibly dense. But in addition to that, the beaches on this island, whether it's on Crandon or the state park, are the beaches for all of Miami-Dade County, among the most popular beaches. We have millions of people that visit. So is it also worth protecting that natural resource, those recreational resources, well, not just the residential structures on Key Biscayne? I mean, it's broader than that. So,
and I can address that as well. Recreation as a primary purpose is not typically a federal interest as the primary purpose. We definitely look at recreation and tourism benefits in our evaluations, but you have to get, for a beach project, a nourishment project, you have to get at least 50% of your costs coming from primary damages to infrastructure reduction. After that, we can account for as much recreation benefits as we look at, and we'll do surveys. We'll count, we'll go through working with the visitor center, counting how many visitors would come and how many square feet of beach you would lose in the future and what kind of losses you would have to tourism and recreation, both visitors to the island and residents on the island. We look at both of those together. When you talked about the beach size, so as we do our evaluation, on a typical coastal project, we would look at a series of different berm widths, different dune heights, and we optimize that based on a nourishment interval. So, a lot of cases you put out more sand, you have to come back less and do it. So your life cycle cost over 50 years may be less doing that. Key Biscayne's got a challenge, like you guys have talked about with the seagrasses. So I mean, as we've talked, is it even permittable to impact the seagrasses? That's what we'll investigate as we go forward. Then looking at the cost, if we can, what's the cost of doing mitigation versus the cost of putting out larger berms and not having to nourish as frequently, because there's a mobilization, demobilization cost savings if you don't have to do it as much. So those are all things that we'll look at. I mean, like I said, we're only on day 2 right now of the project, but those are all things that we will be looking at as we go forward.
Yeah, hi. Yes.
We've got a couple, and then I'm coming back to you, sir. Yep.
This study that's being proposed, a series of studies that are being proposed for Key Biscayne, are certainly not the first ones that you will be doing with municipalities. I'm sure you've done a lot of them, or you've done some of them. I've done some. Have you, in the other studies, looked at and made suggestions as to what incentives can be provided to homeowners that have low houses? And candidly, I'm not speaking of my own, but have low houses so that they can raise them with flexible, more flexible rules than we have now on what you can build, such as height, and letting water go through the bottom, and not have certain impact fees, perhaps, when you go to get permits, so that the key is in a better shape financially, because then you're going to have a higher tax revenue if in fact the homes are raised by the owners rather than wait until the house is flooded, and then you want to get money to raise a 2,000 square foot house which frankly doesn't make too much sense because then you're going to have other constraints built into your formula that'll impede it happening. It's a question.
Yeah, so your question is what, like, can we provide an incentive in order to raise? Yeah. Yes, we have. So there are several studies out there that have done, like, sometimes we'll have like a hybrid solution, right? We may do so is that better? Sorry. So there could be like a hybrid solution, right? So we could do like a beach nourishment on a portion of it to protect some of the residents, but those that are still vulnerable or there's still residual risk, maybe there is a non-structural program or a program that helps residents elevate structures to reduce more risk, right? So you could have a combination of solutions that that, you know, and that raising that home or elevating that home would be cost shared, as Chris stated earlier. You know, would be part of the federal project. Proactively.
In the workshops you had, did they include any level of discussion on uniformity around the seawall and establishing a minimal viable height? You know, I know that we had some topics of conversation with the village, and mandate was removed of, you know, taking it to 6.5 feet, but it seems if we raise our seawall, that would be a very immediate first step to helping the Back Bay and the Pines area. And I mean, maybe just drive around you have at least dozens of different heights along that open area.
Yeah, so that is definitely a solution that we can look at and did talk about this morning. So we've got lots of solutions then, and one of them is just, you know, to have a solid elevation of whatever is to be determined that we model, you know, that would protect water from coming in. And that would be, sometimes you can do that with, you know, more eco-friendly type solutions. You can do that with, I mean, you know, we even talked about, you know, like even putting, you know, you can do it right on the land itself. You can put it out a little further, you know, but there's always consequences or impacts that you have to consider at where exactly that goes, right? And you know, if you have one weak link in your flood wall, the whole thing's bad, right? So that uniformity and making sure all the elevations are correct, you know, whether it's one continuous wall or if it's, you know, everyone does it separate their own to a certain standard, right? And so you have to make sure that everything is level so you don't have, so you still can count those benefits. No, I get it. I get it. Yeah. Right. Yep. Yep. Understood. Yep.
So I live next to a state park. Let's assume for the sake of argument you want a 12-foot flood wall. How does the easements work with, and even the Biscayne National Park? Let's say you want a flood wall down the middle of Biscayne Channel. How does that work with interlocal agreements?
So you're asking how the flood wall works on the state park land?
Just with the assumption that you want to build a flood wall across the south end of the village of Key Biscayne in the state park, or even...
Yeah, so it'll work similar to any private lands. So the policy still applies that it's the non-federal sponsor's responsibility to get the lands that we need to implement the project. So in this case, it would be Miami-Dade County getting the easements from the state or whoever owns that park land that would be needed.
Yes, I would like to know at the moment in what stage is your study for the protection of our beaches?
So we're at the very beginning. Right now, we are in the feasibility phase, and we're years from being able for the federal Corps to be able to put any sand on the beach at this point in time.
So are we going to do any hydraulic studies of our coast to see what is going to be the solution?
Yes, sir. That's what we're going to do during this feasibility phase. Our engineers and our coastal modelers are going to do exactly what you're talking about right now so that we can determine what size of a beach do we need to build. And if that size of the beach that we need to build actually has the potential to impact that seagrass, as we've heard tonight, then there may be a potential environmental acceptable solution whereby we impact the seagrass, but we mitigate for that seagrass. But we're going to study all of that. That's where we are right now in this feasibility phase, is complete study mode.
And just one thing too, we did as part of the previous study from 2019 to 22, that when Key Biscayne was in that was focused on the beach shoreline, and we did some initial cross shore change caused by storms using that kind of we used it's called the seashore model, but basically to look at how the shoreline would evolve over time. But we're gonna do some more detailed analysis that we're starting with this study.
Just a note that if we cannot avoid impacts to seagrass, we will try to mitigate for them.
Yeah, because I heard about a seawall to protect the beach. I don't think, particularly myself, that is a solution to have a vertical wall, because it's going to take away all the sand. It's not going to absorb the energy of the waves, okay? For me, really, we need to do something offshore to be able to protect and to hold the sands that is circulating on the littoral drift.
Yeah, and everything's still on the table for the ocean side. So, and agree that if we have some kind of hard structure as a last line of defense, we still need a natural dune and beach in front of it, and then even could have breakwaters or something like that offshore to make sure that wall's in place when the big storm happens.
Yeah, the only way to protect the offshore waves, the long crested waves, is with an offshore breakwater. On my sense, on my knowledge, okay? So I think that is what we need to do. We need to do a very good hydraulic work to be able to understand all that.
Well, first, thank you very much for coming out here and listening to us. My question is, we're in the process, the village, of considering a massive infrastructure project, stormwater, and I'm curious about the linkage between you folks and what we're going to be doing in stormwater, because you're going to be handling storm surges on the Back Bay and on the Atlantic on the other side. So I guess my question is, yours looks like it's going to take some time. We're looking to even start a zone 1, the K through 8 basin, soon. And I'm also curious if you could also address if the village of Key Biscayne investing in stormwater, is that contingent upon you if we get into the program? Are they independent? If we end up, for some reason, stopping only at zone 1, we don't get kicked out of the program. So if you could just address and just clarify that, and how much you will have input into our stormwater plans that are being proposed right now.
Yeah, I can get that one. So it's not contingent. Our study is not contingent on anything you do. But I think your plan is designed to complement whatever we come up with. So we are fully engaged with the team here, with Steve and Roland, and are working with them, and we'll know whatever they're working on and doing, and it'll be incorporated into our project, because what they do is going to happen regardless of what our study ends up being or doing. And so it'll be incorporated to make sure that they're integrated together, and so that they work in coordination. And it won't, whatever happens with that, it won't impact or be contingent
Amy,
on what we do.
I'd like to add a little bit more details on how we do that from our economic modeling. And going back a couple of steps, just explaining where we are in our process of actually doing the study. So the first thing that our team of engineers, economists, modelers, what we do is we come up with a future without condition. We're going to model the damage drivers on Key Biscayne, on the island. Right now, we have conceptual ideas of where the problems are occurring. We know that there's historical erosion rates. We know that there's, FEMA's got different models showing sea level rise impacts. What we're going to do is we're going to put details to that so we can see exactly where the water is coming on, where we need to focus our solution. Right now, we're coming up with conceptual solutions. And once we start actually being able to put on the ground where those conceptual solutions may fit, we can start taking these ideas and saying, do they work for this problem? How successful would they be to solve the problem here? So we look at that, and what our future without includes is Key Biscayne's plans for the future. So what you have on the books as approved, that's what we include in our future condition. So if you have stormwater treatment, a stormwater treatment master plan, we would look at that and put that in our internal modeling. So we have internal drainage as well. So we don't only look at, when we do our modeling, we don't only look at the forces from the seas. We have to make sure that if we protect from the seas and you're still flooded inland, we may not actually be doing anything, right? So it's a big positive to this project that you guys are proactive and you've gone forward and done a master plan that's going to look at the internal drainage issues, because it gives us the opportunity to actually be able to claim some of the benefits that we would see from the coastal forces. We don't claim, I mean, it's certainly a benefit for you living here, but we don't claim it as a benefit to the federal project because it's a without project condition. So you guys are doing it regardless, right? I mean, well, I know you're still working through it, but it's going to be a without project condition. So when we do our modeling, it's in the ground already. We assume it's in place, and we only look at the federal features or the cost-shared federal features and the incremental benefit over what's on the ground. So, yeah, I mean, but it is certainly a benefit for you, so you don't have to flood, right?
I think that goes back to one of your original questions. One of your original questions is related to that. And so that authorization we have from the 1950s, we're authorized in our coastal storm risk management mission is focused on coastal storm flooding, so the storm surge part of it. We have policies that say, generally interior drainage is a local responsibility. So we're focused on, alternatives that are focused on that during a storm surge, flooding, waves, and erosion damages. But it's all related, so we got to account for all of it.
You're next after
Yeah, and I wanted to say one more thing too about the modeling and as a response to you. So next time we come out here, we will have a schedule, a more detailed schedule. So what will happen within these 3 to 5 years of the feasibility. And it won't take 3 to 5 years to see the results of the modeling. We may have it within a year or a year and a half. And so we'll share all that data and information along the way. So you don't have to wait 5 years before you see what our detailed hydraulic and hydrology, results are. So I just wanted to make sure we clarified that. So we'll be really busy, within the next year working all of our modeling and being able to show you those results, along the way. So once we have exactly where all of your problems are from this coastal flooding, we'll be able to take a deeper dive into the solutions. Does that help? Or I just want to make sure you don't have to wait 5 years to see the results of the model. We'll share all that data and information with you along the way as we work through our process.
Yeah. Hi. Oh, okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Eve Cook. I'm with the Florida Division of the Environmental Defense Fund. I'm really happy to be here and see such a engaged community on this topic. One of my questions is about the problems that are officially supposed to be addressed by this study. So officially, this is a coastal storm management study, but I see up there that there are some other types of flooding that are described, and so I was hoping that you could discuss a little bit about specifically what kinds of flooding are currently officially considered, and if, yeah, on the project.
You guys want to? I mean, I don't think we have any official problem statements at this point. We're still at the early scoping stages. But if we want to talk about hydrology, you guys want to?
Well, yeah, I mean, so
Barbie
what we
is-
have on the slide here is a start, and certainly if there's anything that's not up there, and if there's any other types of problems, you know, we've heard, you know, the storm surge, you know, normal tidal, nuisance flooding, rainfall flooding, where, you know, falls from the sky and ponds up in areas and can't drain out, and groundwater. But, you know, any other types of flooding, you know, we need to know about so we can consider it.
Yeah,
and
even
we
if,
will.
you know, this is a coastal storm risk management study, and we're authorized to look at storm impacts. I mean, we recognize that these are still problems. And the primary problem that we can look at, of course, is the storm surge impacts. But we recognize that there are other primary or secondary and tertiary issues that we've seen. Is that a good way to explain it, hydrologists? They're whispering to each other. I don't know. Okay.
Hi, real quickly, kind of going off of what if some of these questions have been, and I did also want to thank you for coming to our small community and looking at putting federal dollars in a very small place. We understand that that's a high ask, and you've been working with us for many years, and it has not gone unnoticed. So even though people are asking difficult questions, we really appreciate that you're putting this attention to our community. What I wanted to ask, since this is a long-term process as you study this, will you be having an ongoing dialogue with our village on things that we may be able to invest in, whether it's some type of structures out in our ocean that may help improve our cost benefit, basically, as we go through this? Like, do you make recommendations to our community of things that may help us in your analysis, ultimately, when you come to a final decision?
I think it's an economist, maybe, question.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to talk about how, can you guys hear me? Yeah. So we would look at, I mean, part of when we do our analysis, we do come up with recommendations that may not be in the federal interest that a non-federal sponsor could do. So not everything that we come up with would qualify for federal interest. It could be an economic reason, it could be a permitting reason, it could just be it's not in the federal authority to do. So I mean, building codes are, for example, right? If there's when you were talking about raising the seawalls on the coastal side, that's something we'd say, this is what our modeling shows it should be, and we could pass that information on to the village, and they could, from that, they could make, you know, informed decisions on future building codes, new construction. You know, and that's essentially up to your community when you have your internal meetings. As far as interim solutions that the county or the village could do without the federal government, in putting like a breakwater off, I guess that's what you're saying. You could do it, but I don't.
Specifically, would you or could you make recommendations to us that would ultimately alter your analysis in a favorable way for our community?
So from an economics perspective, if you did it yourself without the federal project, the cost and the benefits from that would be realized without the federal project. So it may capture some of the, right, it may actually penalize the BCR. It's not 100% clear what it would do, but if we assume that there's already a structure in place in our without project conditions that's providing benefits, and those damages aren't realized anymore with the federal project, we don't have the opportunity to capture those, right? So it could work either way, yeah, and we wouldn't know until we actually see, right?
So I think, Katie, I mean, the answer is, I mean, we're going to be working with them very closely, right? And so, you know, it's not going to be inference. You know, it's not going to be, hey, maybe we should do it. We're going to have those conversations. We suggest you do that. You know, the economist guys are very clear. They're open with us. He's already told me a couple things. If you do that, it might hurt you, as he said there. So, you know, we're going to wait for them to do that, right? So, but yes, we're going to work with them hand in glove as we go through this. I think we have two more questions on the problem slide. Then I'm going to jump into, remember I told you Pooks, going on Pooks. So we're going to opportunities next. But council member, what do you have?
I guess I'm a little confused because I heard you say on the beach side, we're still basically in the studying side. We haven't gotten anywhere yet. I was led to believe that you had gotten somewhere. You were going to use some type of sheet pile structure and a dune structure along the beach, and that you guys were going to pay for most of it. I think it was like, number I was quoted was about $60 million. But I understand at the last minute you decided, no, we can't do that because we're not taking care of the bay side. So without the bay side, we're not going to do the beach side. But now I'm hearing that really the beach side hasn't been determined what way to do. But what was the structure system you had proposed or were going to propose? Wasn't that the result of your study on the beach?
Yeah, I'll try to clarify on that. So what you're referring to is, again, the previous study where we were studying the main segment of the Miami Beach, and we were looking at, we included Key Biscayne, and we got to the point, if you remember the process or schedule slide, where we got to a tentatively selected plan with that previous study. And that tentatively selected plan included a plan along the ocean side of Key Biscayne that had what we were calling a reinforced dune. So it was a steel sheet pile wall along the basically where the existing dune is now, but it also included, burying that wall and basically periodic nourishment over 50 years to maintain a dune and a small beach similar to what's out there today over the next 50 years. So basically you'd have continued nourishment that would be cost shared, and you'd have the wall there as a last line of defense for flooding. So that was and then tiebacks to about Crandon Boulevard. Now that was in our draft report that went out for public review. At the same time, it went out for our agency technical review. It went out for an independent external peer review and a slew of reviews that essentially, flagged the issue that we ran into with having, flooding coming around from the backside that wasn't being accounted for. And so essentially that is what led to us being here with this new study. So I would not be surprised if we, go through our analysis and, what we had in that tentatively selected plan in our draft report or something similar to that could still work. But it's not like that's set in stone at this point. There's room to, reevaluate it as part of this study as we look at a comprehensive plan for the ocean and backside.
And just
the money we're paying you for the Back Bay study, does that include the beach also?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
And some of the information that we're going to bring forward now for this next phase is, our coastal modelers could talk a little bit more, but we have updated storms. So the frequency of storms, the intensity of the storms, just in the last 3 years, the Corps of Engineers has adopted a new coastal hazard system that looks at different storms. We have different and new updated erosion rates on the beach, which we'll be incorporating as well. The original analysis, when we started the study, we were expecting the situation to be similar to Miami, to the Miami beaches. And erosion was going to be the primary driver of damages. As we went through the study, we determined that inundation looked to be a greater driver of damages on Key Biscayne. So the model that we used was not as specific as the one we're going to use now to look at inundation or flooding damages. So we're going to use a combination of updating the beach model or the coastal model and using a different inundation model as we go through to really identify what the drivers of risk are.
Hi, my name is Ramesh Francis Khan. I've been on Key Biscayne for 50 years. I remember when they did the extension on Miami Beach way back in the day. I lived in Miami Beach, 72. It was a joke. They extended the beach, and the joke was the old people had to take a bus from the sidewalk to go to the water, but the beach stayed. The beach is still there. So, I don't know, how that one works. Over here, the problem I see is when you put these pilings back, we put millions of dollars of sand on this beach, and it's all gone bye-bye. You guys remember when we did that? Millions of dollars of sand a few years back? Went washed away. There goes all your money. Nature has a way of doing things, and you're going to get some big storms, And if it comes up and you've got these concrete, these steel pilings here and your beach washes away, now you're going to have to move this stuff back. And tides come and go. And Key Biscayne's been here since the beginning of the Spanish recording history. So, you know, the word key comes from dead bones of the sailors that died when they hit a barrier and they washed up on the shore. That's where the word key comes from, Cayos, bones. But it's been here, and tides come and go. And I've been living at the towers 50 years. The beach is still there, and it comes and goes. But it's, you know, but putting these things, if you get that sand washed away, you're going to take a ladder down to the beach, and you have to move that stuff. So, you know, you guys, nature has a way of doing things, and spending a lot of money. We wasted some money on that sand. By the way, we got one of the best city managers, one of the best mayors, and Mr. London over there. Unfortunately, I voted for you too many times, but that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Okay. Let's.
So a wall by itself, you know, blocks that natural process that allows the shoreline to kind of migrate naturally. So yeah, you put a hard barrier in there, that's going to impact that. You know, like it's been come up, you know, on here, what was done in, you know, the early 70s on Miami Beach, we placed about 13 you know, the nourishments here, we're talking 30,000 cubic yards. From Baker's Hall over inlet to Government Cut, we placed 13 million cubic yards in one project. Yeah, all the way down to South Beach. And so a much robust, longer project like that's going to be a lot more stable and have a lot more room to, you know, come and go naturally than a small project that's been limited to here. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yep, and yeah, so groins and stabilizing structures are certainly something we'll consider here moving forward too on the beach side.
Okay.
All right.
All right, let's go on to opportunities. We're on our O. So an opportunity, basically, you defined your problems. Your opportunity is what can we improve? What do we want this project to, what do we want our benefits to be? How do we want it to improve the community? And so this is just kind of a brainstorm of some of the opportunities that we've come up with, and we want to hear from you. So some of the ideas I'll just throw out there is, of course, we want to reduce our economic damages that are due to storm surge, inundation, and erosion. That's a primary. And then maintain existing recreational opportunities. A major one here at the bottom, reduce frequency of major disruptions to life to the public due to coastal storms. So we want to hear from you all. What are some opportunities? What are things you want to see from this project improved on Key Biscayne? I know, we've been all over the place. I don't know. This is our project manager who does the money. Let me give this one a chance.
So what was the question is can you get money to contribute without contributing your own money? Yes. Yes, the DEP. So there's certainly opportunities for the non-federal sponsor to bring dollars from other resources, as long as those dollars are not other federal resource dollars. So if you find dollars from the state or you find dollars from other resources, then yes, these can be used as your contributing share, or the non-federal sponsor's contributing share. Yes, sir.
Hi, I see the second to last thing is to create protection for mooring areas for vessels. At the yacht club here, we're exposed to northwest winds. Our seawall has never really been completed. There might be a way that we could expand and finish the job, but do it in a way that would be very environmentally friendly. As far as maybe encouraging environments sponges, corals, coral reefs, and it would protect a lot of the shoreline back on the bay side. And if it was to have biological things, I could even see getting people from the students from the Mast Academy here, having it as yeah, a lot of things.
Yeah, and piggybacking off the idea of being able to create a structure that can function in and provide protection, but also perhaps have ecosystem benefits. I was wondering what the team and their consideration about incorporating more work with the Engineering with Nature team, and maybe even officially having them be part of the team, the project development team, because they are such an important resource that is part of the Army Corps of Engineers, and they are doing a lot of really interesting, innovative work on creating structures with multiple benefits.
Yes, we actually invited them this week, but they were out of the country. Yeah.
Yeah, so we will work with them,
Yes.
and they'll be invited to future meetings
And
as well.
and I guess of another benefit is we're trying to engage the same team member that's working in the area with like the Miami Back Bay team, so that we have consistency across the Miami area. Sorry, let's let he's catching up with us. Just put EW in. Just put EW in. Oh. I saw another.
I hate to bring this up, but Rickenbacker Causeway.
Yep.
We need to think about it.
Protect evacuation route or Rickenbacker, whatever you want to put. Yeah. Do both.
Well, maybe this is a far-fetched question, but will always be a flood zone. And even if we implement all the measures that you suggest, do you think it will reclassify us on the National Flood Insurance Program?
So we will, we talked about that today, and so that will be part of our evaluation as, we provide more protection. And do you know more about that, Kevin, or can you talk more about that? We did have a big discussion on that today in our group.
I mean, I know about it from other projects that if we're able to reduce flood premiums, that's a benefit that we can claim as a federal project. Are we going to be able to do that? I don't know. FEMA was with us today. We had discussions. It's something we would look at. They take into consideration the probability of inundation from coastal events, and if our intent is to reduce that, I don't know their process that would go through. So it's something that we would look at, and we would definitely, we've heard it twice today, and FEMA was invited to join us today. So we'll continue working with them and figuring out the answer to that.
Okay, let's go to the next one. No, we've been here a while. Okay, these are objectives. Our second O. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot I was holding it. It's been a long week. Okay, objectives. So we showed, we've been talking through a few of these. Of course, our primary that we're authorized for, of course, is storm, reducing damages from coastal storms. So we're one that's very inclusive is reducing damages from coastal flooding with considerations for recreation, tourism, and environmental resources in the study area. This list is not all inclusive of things that we could consider as objectives. Second very important one would be reducing potential risk to public health and safety. minimizing damage to transportation systems that comprise your evacuation route. And so we've heard that last night, we've heard it tonight, very important to you all. So that's a major consideration for us in this study. Increased protection of critical infrastructure and emergency management capabilities. So things like your police station, the water treatment, what was that? Oh, no, it was a substation. I'm sorry. The substation, and then fire stations, things like that. So a lot of these we've heard are very important to you all. So we want to hear if there's anything else that you think would be an important objective for the study. So these are things that we want the study to meet, or what we want to meet in order for the study to be successful. What would be our goal? That might fit under that life safety one.
And so I'll just state too, like, why are these important? So this is how we measure the success of our study, right? So this is really where we get a lot of our benefits. So we come up with metrics of how we're going to meet these objectives, right? So how do we measure reduction in damages? Well, we do, as Kevin explained, our economic models, and we look at, the damages without the project, and then the damages with the project, and that delta or the difference are your benefits that you claim. And that's how we measure whether we've met the objective of reducing damages. We also, part of our modeling is the life safety component. So if you have flooding and lives are lost during that flood without the project, and then if there's a reduction with our project, we can claim those life loss benefits, and our goal is to reduce those. And so that's how we measure whether implementing and investing in our project actually is successful. So that's hopefully helps explain why these objectives are important. This is like a key and a kind of the heartbeat of whether, how we move the study and how we measure the success of the project.
In other words, don't get quiet now. This is what they're going to look at.
Yeah, and these are things.
The efficacy of this project.
Okay.
So let them know.
Oh, we got one behind you, and then one up here.
Hi, I've kind of kept quiet on this. I'm not sure it relates, but on the other hand, it is a public safety issue. I don't know if you've looked as far north of us as Virginia Key, and there's a sewage treatment plant. And so we have issues with leaks and many times man-made created errors. But some of the solutions, and they are moving towards solutions. We do have no swim days with high levels of bacteria, fecal matter. I mean, it's an issue for us. So I would hope you would look into that. And one of the things they're considering doing is, instead of pumping the sewage 5 miles off, the treated sewage, maybe pumping it off further. And I don't know how that messes with the hydrology or what, I don't know if it connects or not. But it would certainly be nice to know you were looking into that for our safety.
I think on our next one, which is constraints, I think that's something we'll write down under that one. So keep that in mind.
I can contribute a little something to that. Well, there's the Miami back-based study. There's the Miami back-based study that's taken into consideration Virginia Key and the treatment plant, but also just as a point that needs to be underscored. The ocean outfall discharges for wastewater are essentially being shut down. So right now they're in the process of actually building the deep injection well system that is going to be taking that treated effluent and no longer discharging it offshore, but actually taking it down to the lower Florida aquifer. Well, actually, I mean, deep injection wells as wastewater discharges has been done for quite a few years now. Yeah, all through South Florida. I mean, they've been using deep injections wells at the South District wastewater treatment plant for decades now. No, it's been a while. Yeah, they never had an ocean outfall over there. I mean, I'm not going to speak as an expert on Miami-Dade Water and Sewer Department system, but they have been discharging to deep injections wells at the South District treatment plant for a long time. They'd never had ocean outfalls to discharge to. They're going to be doing that. I mean, and when we say deep injection as well, I mean, they're taking it down to like about 3,500 feet, 3,000 to 3,500 feet in the lower Floridan aquifer. It's way down, yeah. But it's being considered.
This is in the 60s. I forget the name of the hurricane, but there was a barge that got loose on the other side, on the mainland, and I was a teenager then, it did something to the first bridge as you come in the causeway, and we had no water for several days. So the pipe that brings our water, so we had to, the Army Corps of Engineers had to come, put a little bridge there, kind of to let us come in, and we had trucks at the 7-Eleven, and we had to go and get buckets of water to take to our homes for several days. My question is where's this pipe that brings the water, and in case a storm comes, how, is it buried? Is it very big? You know, just that.
So I mean, there would be some coordination with the water and sewer department in regards to utilities that enter the island. I mean, we're still investigating those things. Those will be things that we take into account during the feasibility phase. There'll be some coordination with the utilities, but at this point in time, I mean, right now, we don't know where they are exactly just yet.
I would say it'd be more likely during like a pre-construction engineering and design phase is where you would really look into utilities. Some maybe during feasibility, but more like when you were designing a project, like after authorization.
I mean, any proposed solution, structural solution that we come up with will obviously take into account any existing utilities, wastewater, drinking water, all of that, and make sure that it's integrated properly and doesn't negatively impact any of the existing facilities that the village has.
So not only that, we also, when we do our damages, we look at public infrastructure. So, I mean, we have an inventory right now. If it's buried, obviously there would be less likely to have impacts. You have substations that we would look at, and the impacts on the damages to public infrastructure as well. We don't just look at residential, we look at commercial structures, we look at public infrastructure. So those are all things that we consider as we do our evaluations to determine whether there's damages and damages prevented.
So my question is, in the history of the Corps, have you ever taken a barrier island to such a level that you could have a shelter-in-place order on the island? Always evacuate, right?
That's one of the, we had discussions about that today as well, because you're seeing the life safety issue, right? So one of the things is we do risk management. You can't avoid risk, right? Risk is always going to exist, and what we don't want to happen as we do federal projects and coastal projects is to people to get a sense of complacency that they wouldn't have to evacuate if there's a hurricane. You could have wind damages, all sorts of reasons that could still cause problems. So, right, I don't think we'd ever get to a point that we would encourage people to shelter in place during a massive storm, right? We would still encourage evacuations. That's still the first line of safety that you would want to do. Is that what you're asking, right? Yeah. That we would, I mean, the evacuation orders are typically handled by the local municipalities or the counties, but I mean, from a federal perspective, I don't think we would encourage that, right? We would encourage to evacuate from the coastlines and get the safety.
We'd all fit in the lighthouse. It's been there 200 years.
I was just curious, so when do you measure these objectives? When in 15
So
years,
as
20 years?
we're planning the study, as we get an array of solutions and alternatives, we'll look at how we evaluate those based on these study objectives. And it's based on a lot of models, and they've talked a lot about in the back our benefit cost ratio, and that's basically, what they talked about our damages prevented. And they can talk a lot about the models and how they do that, but that's when we basically quantify and look at how well we're achieving these objectives. So we do it before we pick a solution, and that's how we decide which one provides the most benefits and is the best solution.
So I'll speak a little bit about when exactly we do that. So our planning process is a 6-step process, right? So we have we identify the problems, opportunities, objectives, and constraints. This is step 1 of our planning, our Civil Works, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers planning process. So this is step 1. What we do next is we take inventory, like things that you guys are doing, like your master plan for the stormwater. And so we'll take that into account. We take inventory of like population, all of that, and then throughout the process, we will start evaluating and measuring and using these metrics qualitatively within probably in a year, right? And so we'll start developing the criteria, how we're going to measure it. But as soon as our models are ready with the outputs of like exactly the delta of those damages, that's when we'll be able to measure it, right? So as I spoke earlier, if we start doing our H&H modeling, so for this particular study, we're going to use 2 models, as Kevin related to earlier, one on the beach side, one on the bay side. And so as soon as the beach model may be ready first, so whenever those results from the model are ready, the water levels, the damages, the life loss, everything that we need to be able to measure, as soon as they're out of the model, then we'll be able to take those and compare them with each alternative will be ran separately within those models, and we'll be able to do an evaluation and comparison step, which is our steps 4 and 5, and then 6 is when we actually select a plan. And so there's different iterations of that. We can do it qualitatively before the models are ready and just use some best professional judgment, historical data, things like that to kind of guide us of, what solutions may be possible. But we'll actually quantitatively measure that once our models are up in production and given us realistic results, and we've calibrated those models and they're ready to be able to, have good, solid, quality results.
So you won't really know the reality. So this is all modeling, and I guess as a layperson,
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Living here, I wanted to know the reality, that we really did, we reduced potential risk to public health, or we saved some buildings, or whatever it is. We won't know that for how many, in your experience for the Army Corps? 20 years away from the project?
Oh,
30 years?
For actually being constructed?
No, to actually see it. This is all modeling. I'm saying what really visibly.
Once the project is in place and your storm comes, that's when you'll be able to see the physical results and if that reduction in benefits actually occurs, right?
Estimated what our alternatives will do, I'd say 1 to 2 years from
Yeah.
now. In that range, 1 to 2 years from now, we're going to have a refined list of alternatives and estimates, initial draft estimates of values to go along with those objectives and the benefits associated with them.
Yeah, within 2 years, 2 to 3 years.
Typical studies like this, at about the 2-year mark, we've got some initial, estimates where we can start discussing those and communicating, and then what needs to be refined to finish things up.
Does that answer your question?
Okay.
Okay.
I guess what I'm trying to get
Yeah.
my head around is this is all just modeling.
Yes.
And we shouldn't walk out of here thinking we will achieve this, and we will see it throughout the village in 5 years.
No.
No, I put it back on this timeline slide for reference here.
So yeah. So this block right up here is where we are. This is a 3 to 7 years in the process. And then to actually go to construction, to actually get, it's like a 10 to 15-year process from start to finish.
When you're asking the question, you're actually talking about physical infrastructure on the ground, or are you talking about understanding the risk? Because we'll know the risk to the community 5 years from now. But we don't know the risk to the community in 5 years.
Yeah.
When you're asking the question, you're actually talking about physical infrastructure on the ground, or are you talking about understanding the risk? Because we'll know the risk to the community much earlier than we actually have solutions. In the next, the actual, whatever we build on the ground, yeah, right. Right. So when we build it, whatever infrastructure there is, in a storm actually coming, to be able to say, look, we have success. I mean, hopefully you never have a storm that you have to see that, right? That's the first thing. But if we do, it, like Marcy said, it'll be, you know, in future 10 plus years until you actually have something physically on the ground. But in the interim, I think. At which point then you have to wait for a storm. You're right, which we hope doesn't happen. Right.
Maybe you're lucky it never comes, but then if it
We
does,
hope you never have
then
to
you can
see it or test it.
Then you'll know for sure.
What would have happened if we decided not to contribute to this modeling and this back bay study? Would you still do it?
Well,
Cost-shared project.
Even though the county would go ahead with you?
I mean, I think
Well,
that.
it's a cost-shared project, so right now, the Village of Key Biscayne has an agreement with Miami-Dade County. So while Miami-Dade County is the sponsor on paper, they've executed the feasibility cost-share agreement. There is an agreement between the village and the county to participate in the cost share.
And then when you go through this whole procedure, is there any the probability of you actually doing it? Actually doing it meaning constructing it, rather than just modeling, studying, et cetera.
Yes, sir. There's definite
High probability?
Yes, sir. Yes, I think there's high probability because we have done the main segment, we've done the Sunny Isles segment. It's going to be complicated. I'm not going to tell you it's not going to be complicated. But yeah, I think there's high probability that we can find solutions that we will present in a recommended plan to the chief.
And that's be a 15-year project?
Yes, sir.
Not a 15-year
No chance of being any
study.
faster.
We'll work as fast as we possibly can.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Let's move on to the constraints.
All right.
Or on to the, yeah.
These are constraints. See, there's things we want to avoid. So, for example, we don't want to, I know we're past our time here, so we're going to go through these quick. We do not want to conflict with federal law. We do not want to increase the flood risk to any properties. We know there's limited land availability. Community acceptability is a major one. We don't want to propose a plan that's not acceptable to you. We wouldn't want to do that at all. So, and also, you mentioned earlier, we want to have a plan that's compatible with the village's resilient infrastructure and adaptation program. So, what are things that you don't want us to do? You don't want us to see us do? We've heard a lot of people don't want to see a wall. That's one thing that we've heard. We don't, you know, concrete infrastructure. Other things. Here's your chance. Yep. Anything. Yes. Tell us what you don't want. I know it's late. We've been at this since 8 a.m.
Is the wall the best idea?
I'm a biologist. I'm going to refer to these engineers right here.
It's definitely one of the structural solutions that we're considering. Is it the best solution? We don't really know at this point. As Kevin talked about earlier, we really need our future without project modeling to really tell us where the damages are so we know how to best protect them or like those areas of the village. Could the damages be everywhere and a wall be the best solution? Maybe. It's just we're so early in the study, we can't really answer that yet. All alternative, structural, non-structural, are on the table, and that's definitely one of them that's on the table. And as Amy's mentioned, we've heard, you know, nobody wants an ugly wall in their backyard and watching the sunset on the backside of Key Biscayne. And, you know, we will do our best to listen to everybody here and develop solutions that, if that is the solution that makes the most sense and it's what the village needs and it has a positive BCR, we will do our best to make that wall as pretty as possible. And there are ways to, through our policy to, you know, add habitat and get benefits in that way too. So maybe it's some mangroves in front of the wall. Maybe there's it's a prefab concrete wall that has fish habitat kind of built into it, so it creates habitat for fish and things like that. But we have heard, obviously nobody wants something ugly, but it's just too early in the process to really say if that's going to be the solution at this point. But it's under consideration. Does that help?
Yeah, Mayor Rasco.
Talk about any nature-based solutions that you have used in similar projects in the South.
I can go to my slide. This is Steve's favorite slide. Oh, is it not changing again? It does not like me tonight.
Well, while you're pulling that up, though, I mean, the original natural nature-based solution that we use all around Florida is dunes and beach current. So, I mean, that's one we've been using, around Florida since the 70s. On the Back Bay side, in our coastal storm risk management program, there's a limited number of it's been more, I guess, kind of like pilot studies of looking at, breakwaters that could serve as kind of like a reef. We've done some oyster reef type pilot studies for Back Bay shorelines, marsh restoration, kind of thin layer placement sort of things. Those, kind of pilot projects and those kind of things have, less of an impact from the flood risk reduction, but they can provide some lower levels of it if done properly, and then they can provide you some of those supplemental benefits in other accounts besides just the damage reduction.
And I just wanted to talk a little bit about nature-based solutions and just about how I think that it's not just going to be one thing, right? And so it's about the multiple lines of defense, which will likely include nature-based solutions.
Yeah, and I think with the figure Amy just pulled up.
Right.
You can see here how, as you come from my left here, you have your nature. Your NNBF is your natural and nature-based features, starting here at the ocean, with what Marty mentioned here with your beach and dune restoration. As you move further inland, you have things like living shorelines, oyster reef, maritime forest. So any of those natural and nature-based, they replicate a natural ecosystem or natural habitat or barrier. Then you have more of a structural solution, which would be like a levee, flood wall, shoreline stabilization, drainage improvement. And then you move further towards the inland and you get more of a non-structural solution, like we discussed earlier, where you can have elevated buildings, houses, acquisition of properties, relocation, like enhanced flood warning system or evacuation, like we talked about for the causeway, protection of evacuation routes. This kind of shows you two things, really, the broad range of different solutions, and it shows you the multiple lines of defense that are possible in a range of different types of solutions. So, anything else you don't want to see?
So it sounds like we're culminating here. So, one last chance for any comments. Chris is here. He's been amazing. He's got very good handwriting. Pretty impressive. Pretty impressive, by the way. Yeah. Yeah. Or you want to avoid, basically. Yeah. Things that might be a problem.
I live on the beach side. I live in one of the condos, and so I love dunes. From Massachusetts, I love dunes, but I worry about dunes that could become really, really sky high And so I'm curious, like, what we can do, or what you guys are thinking about for Key Biscayne, because I know that we started putting in the sea oats, and, you know, Roland's been putting in things to help us with starting to create dunes, right, Roland? Is that what we're doing out there?
Well, we're regularly sort of rebuilding the dunes as they're being eaten up by the ocean. And so every time that we do a beach renourishment, we're regularly rebuilding the dunes and revegetating them to stabilize the sand.
So my question would be, like, you know, I would be concerned if it started to, like, get really high like you see in Provincetown, Massachusetts.
Yeah, I think we're too early at this point to really say, like, what elevation a dune would be at, but I think that's something, you know, we would consider.
But
And
impacts the view shed will definitely be
Yeah.
evaluated for any alternative and you know, mitigated
There's your
for if
word.
needed.
Steve doesn't like the word view shed, but it's like, we don't want to put something out on the landscape that doesn't look good. That's what it means.
I know the dunes in Provincetown, and I guarantee you that this beach will not be having dunes like in Provincetown.
Yes. So anyway, yes, I did learn a word today, view shed. I'm not sure where they came with it, but they did. So
Yeah, and
look, guys, we're going to close. It's 8 o'clock. We're going to be here for another 10, 15 minutes if you'd like to come up and talk to us. But I want to thank you for coming out. We got a lot of good feedback, so we appreciate that. I think the best quote of the night, we're 2 days in. Okay, 2 days in. So stick with us. Stick with us as we go through this process. And now we're already 3 years in, so it's only 12, Ed. So, but anyway, I want to thank you all for coming. We're here to listen, but I really want to thank the Corps of Engineers, Chris, your team. These guys are professionals, guys and gals. And you can be assured that they have our best interest at mind. So hold them accountable. We'll be holding them accountable, but work with us as we get through. So thank you very much for coming tonight. And we're here. We'll be here for another 10 or 15 minutes. Have a good night, everybody. Take care.